Welcome to the Lensrentals Podcast. I'm Ryan Hill. This week, I'm talking with Nathan Armstrong and Will Evans of NLA Projects, a content creation agency focused on photography and commercial video production. I approached this conversation in kind of two halves. In the first half, you'll hear about Nathan's experience in concert photography. He's gone from shooting local Memphis bands in high school to covering artists like Taylor Swift and Paul McCartney, and events like the American Music Awards. More recently, Nathan and NLA Projects Production Manager Will Evans have expanded into commercial videography, which is what we'll cover in the second half of the episode. You'll hear how the lessons they learned in the world of concert photography now inform their client relationships and gear choices for video work. The two have more in common than you might think. Here are Nathan Armstrong and Will Evans. Nathan and Will, welcome to the Lensrentals Podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
So I want to just go ahead and jump into it because we've got a lot to cover. The last time we spoke, the last time our blog editor, Zach, spoke with you, you talked mainly about concert photography. And so you're working a lot in like the video realm now, but I want to start with the concert photography thing. So first of all, thank you for doing that blog article. We'll link to that in the show notes. There's a very interesting article, and especially for like if any of our listeners are like looking for examples of the kind of photography we're talking about. The first question I have for you is, I imagine that the most difficult thing in going from like local shows to larger concerts is just getting the permission to do those shoots.
Sure.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what the process was for your first kind of like larger show?
Yeah. So we had been kind of doing club shows and larger cap venues and rooms in Memphis, and that was going really well. And we started to want to kind of reach out and do some larger pop shows outside of Memphis. And so what we started doing was looking for kind of trying to identify some bands that, were kind of growing very quickly. And, when you get into this, you have some natural relationships that you build with publicists and those things. And a lot of those publicists at record labels will kind of work with multiple artists. And so we had a relationship from doing a previous show in Memphis with One Direction's publicist. I think they were at Sony at the time. And so they were doing a show in Chicago, and I was going up there to visit family at the time. And so I thought it would be fun to try to get approved and shoot that show. And so I reached out to her, and we got approved for it. And that was kind of the biggest show that we had done to date. I mean, it was in a stadium, it was at Soldier Field, and it was a football stadium show.
Yeah,
so
I've seen a show at Soldier Field. That is a huge stadium. Yeah.
It's about as big as you get from a venue cap standpoint. And so, and One Direction was really kind of rising to the peak of their fame at the time and their
about
popularity.
What year was this?
Maybe 2016.
Okay.
Around then. And so
peak One Direction era.
Yes, peak One Direction era. And so we covered that. And then after that, we were kind of able to get approved for larger shows. And I remember we did the American Music Awards pretty soon after that. And so, that was kind of when you see that on the website, our in ticket, if you will.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. So that's why it was a little easier. I was going to ask you about that. So you don't necessarily like send out to a publicist a list of shows. You just say, hey, this is my name, this is my website. And that work being on your website kind of conveys that message that you've done this before.
Right. And more than that, I mean, we had a relationship again with this publicist. And so, as you do smaller artists, it's kind of a give-take thing. And we still get emails from publicists that say, hey, we have a new up-and-coming artist that we want to, start to get some features on and those type things. And we'll do those. And then when we want to shoot a larger show, we have that relationship. And so it works out really good, and you start to build those relationships, and that's kind of how we, like anything else, I mean, relationships were the biggest part of it.
For someone maybe, a starting concert photographer, what are some steps you would recommend taking early if they're interested in kind of pursuing that line of work?
Yeah, I would say, I probably took the hardest route into looking back on it in terms of just the most obstacles. I mean, we started a publication from scratch and had no idea what we were doing. And so I think it probably took longer for us to be able to shoot the larger shows than it would have been. I recommend that people reach out to a publication that's local for them, the Commercial Appeal, the Daily Memphian, some, places like that here in Memphis, and say, hey, I would love to cover this show. Do you guys have any interest in running a piece on it? And, they can then reach out for you and get approval to shoot the show.
Okay, right. Then they're the one dealing with the publicist. And
correct.
Yeah, it's not just some stranger.
Correct. And so that's kind of how I recommend that people get into it. Again, I kind of took the hardest route in terms of, we had to actually run the publication at the same time. And so it was a little bit more time consuming than, just go shoot the show and deliver the photos to the publication.
And that's 901 Music, right?
Correct. Yeah. That's the publication. But yeah, and again, I think, if you don't have any work in your portfolio from a music perspective, it's easy to go out and just bring your camera to, a club show, a 200 to 400 cap room here in Memphis. They're not typically checking for DSLRs and those type things like some of the bigger cap rooms. And so.
Right. And a lot of smaller local artists would probably be happy to have somebody there.
Sure. And so doing that and kind of starting to build up your portfolio there, that's what we did. And it worked great. We just kind of happened to tie it to a brand instead of our name. And it's funny, I think I mentioned this in the blog article, but shooting in those club shows is actually somewhat more difficult than shooting a larger show because the lighting gets better as the show gets bigger.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And usually at a larger show, there's like an area for you to be rather than just kind of like having to get as close to the stage as you can.
Yeah, it's much more logistically laid out. So, but yeah, I would say just kind of start to shoot some of those shows, build a portfolio, and then go to a publication in your area and, say, hey, I would love to, shoot this room that's, 2,000 cap, and then kind of work your way up from there. So, again, just relationships, try to find someone that through somebody maybe at a publication and get in that way.
And like from a creative standpoint, how does because we're talking mostly about concert photography now, but your portfolio also includes portrait photography and commercial and wedding photography. How does your approach to concert photography differ from, say, portrait or wedding? What are some maybe concert-specific skills you have to have?
I think it differs in the sense, the biggest thing is obviously that you're not necessarily posing the artist. So you don't have any control necessarily over where the artist is standing or what the lighting looks like or even the location that you're shooting at. Unless you're doing you're the artist photographer and you're doing some portraits or something backstage, you have more control obviously that way. But if you're just shooting for a publication and going in and covering the show, you don't have any control over those things. So I think from a creative standpoint, it's more about, working with what you're given and trying to get, when I go in, we just shot Maverick City and Kirk Franklin at the Forum last weekend. It at the beginning, I think it's like, oh, I just want to get these solid, shots that are great for press. When I walk into a show now, I'm always like, okay, what can I capture that other people aren't capturing within the confines of where I'm able to shoot? And so
we hear that from sports photographers a lot.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And it's a very, very similar situation.
Right. And
it's not necessarily like what's the best shot. It's more, if there are 100 photographers there, you have to get something that nobody else can.
Sure. And so, really that's kind of my thing. And I think at the beginning, I definitely, you have 3 songs. And so I need to shoot as many photos as I can in 3 songs. And so now I'll walk in and say, okay, and I won't even shoot, maybe the first half of the first song and just say, okay, here's my limits of where I can go. Here's the gear I have. So what can I capture that, these other 10 people aren't capturing?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think from a creative perspective, that's a lot of fun to be able to go in it. And sometimes those limitations allow for better images than you would get with no limitations. So, and we're doing a lot more black and white stuff and those type things. And just, even some crowd stuff, it's not necessarily all about shooting the artist. You're there to cover the event. And so I've been doing a lot more like audience stuff as well, just to kind of capture emotion on people's faces and those type things, because that's part of the atmosphere of the event, not just the artist.
And speaking of those limitations, I was really surprised in the blog article to read that you're, and I don't know if this has changed since then, typically shooting with a Leica SL2 and primes.
Mm-hmm.
That surprised me a ton. I don't do a lot of concert photography.
Sure.
But my first thought would be, like a 1DX and a zoom lens. It's kind of the same stuff you would use for like sports photography.
Sure.
But yeah, why the Leica and primes?
Yeah, so we switched. We were shooting Canon. I guess this was probably 2 or 3 years ago. And it was right when Will came on, just right before then, that we switched to Leica. And we switched because of the Q2. We originally bought the Q2 just as my wife and I actually rented it from you guys for our honeymoon and several trips that we went on early in our marriage. And so we bought one, and it was intended to just be, this is our fun camera for us. We weren't going to use it for work. And we loved it so much, we ended up bringing it to shoots and client shoots, and Laura started using it for weddings. And so we just loved it. We loved the color that came out of it. We loved the, again, limitations of the 28 millimeter on it, the fact that you can't change the lens. And so we kind of naturally ended up starting to rent the SL2 a couple times, and we loved that too. So we bought that, and we bought the 50 Summilux SL for it. And that's kind of now what I would call our A-cam kit for 90% of the photo work that we do, both wedding and client and music. And so obviously, if you're shooting from the soundboard at a concert, like, I'll use the 90 to 280 like a video zoom. But we just love the color that comes out of them. We love the limitations of them. We love that it's a little bit different in terms of than what everyone else is doing.
Yeah. You're sort of naturally forcing yourself to get shots that nobody else would.
Correct. And people talk about the Leica look, and there definitely is a look to it. The colors just seem richer again, and Will talk about it later, but we've actually started using some of their stuff for video too. But we love the Leica ecosystem. And another thing is and not that this is necessarily important from a technical perspective, but we found that a lot of when we do agency work for larger corporations, when we show up with a Leica kit, it kind of means something, kind of like when you show up with a red kit.
Yeah.
And again, not that means anything from a standpoint of, I'm not saying like, you're a better photographer because you shoot Leica, or you're a better cinematographer because you shoot red. But,
But yeah, it's not nothing.
It is nothing, because when you show up and you have those things, you're automatically given some credibility that you would normally have to build.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying you still have to build the credibility, but it gives you just another thing on the list of like, okay, I can relax when you show up for the first time with a new client, those that know what it is. And so
we've had a wedding photographer mention that she uses a 70 to 200 to like have like a big like white telephoto lens on her Canon for the similar thing. Like it makes you look like a professional, which, it might seem facile or whatever, but if you're dealing with, a client who might not necessarily know everything about the technique, it matters.
Yeah. So, and again, we love the primes. We've rented, I think, probably all of the SL primes at this point from you guys. We own the 50, and the next one on our list will probably be the 90. But we also just added a Q2 mono to the kit, and we love that for less than ideal lighting situations, especially. So using that at concerts, using that at wedding receptions, using it for behind the scenes. Will's taking a particular liking to the mono, but it's great from a perspective of just, again, something different that no one else is getting. When you show up and it's a limitation because you can only shoot black and white. And so it makes you get different shots. Like, oh, this would look good in color, but not necessarily in black and white. So I'm going to look for a different shot that really makes the black and white sensor shine.
Yeah. And that's kind of where that, I don't know, the Leica look thing is a little bit hard to like quantifiably define.
Sure.
But that is where it would come in those kind of like high contrasty areas. Like,
and I've had a lot of conversations with friends, both photographers and cinematographers, that are a lot smarter than me in terms of the color science and, the actual mechanics. And it really is hard to quantify, like you said. It's, when you talk to them that really know and have done studies on it, again, it's very hard to quantify. But when you look at the images side by side, it's there.
Yeah. So, and it's not necessarily, I don't know, we've done a bunch of blog articles about this.
Sure.
People keep asking about it. It's not necessarily something that you cannot replicate in post.
Right.
But it, that requires doing it and having some intentionality and knowing exactly what you're looking for and just like getting it right out of the camera is so helpful, especially this is something I didn't even think to ask about, especially in a case like concerts or award shows where you may not have much time at all to do editing. What is the delivery process like for that kind of work?
Yeah. So I guess the most interesting when I explain this is probably the award show workflow. And so I'll kind of explain that. So typically how it works is I'll be in the room or the theater shooting, and we'll have a runner that the show typically provides that will run cards back and forth. There's been a lot of photographers there that I've talked to. And again, when I'm there, like, you feel very out of place because it's like all these guys have been doing this for, 20, 30 years.
Working for like the Associated Press or whatever.
They're pros. And I just feel like I'm a fish out of water, like learning like crazy and, feel very, very honored to be there. But yeah, so typically I'll be in the room shooting. We'll have a runner, and those guys have tried wireless workflows before and they just don't work.
Yeah, especially when everybody in the room is doing it.
Yeah, from a reliability standpoint, it just doesn't work for the speed they need. So we'll have a card runner, and then Laura, my wife, in the past has typically been in the war room, and so the card runner will run typically after every song.
Wow.
And so she'll edit the photos and then typically have them like 5 or 10 selects within 5 minutes of that song being over. So it takes a very fast machine and we kind of really, we literally will practice the workflow before we go just to make sure that we're even down to like, okay, when do we format the cards so that the computer doesn't have to realize what's already been imported, like just taking that step out even. But yeah, I think that's the most interesting workflow from a standpoint because they're trying to keep up almost with TV live on socials.
Right.
And so that's kind of the game plan.
So these are going to publications that kind of have to immediately say like so-and-so won such and such award or this happened during the musical performance.
Yeah. And we've been, from an award show standpoint, like we've been on the press side with 901 Music, but the last couple times we've actually worked for the shows. And so it's going to like the show's actual profiles.
Oh, gotcha.
And so like they're trying to keep up with Getty from a standpoint of making sure that the show's profiles have stuff, faster than the outlets do.
And Getty is a company that does only this pretty much and has been doing it for years and years and years.
Right.
And like so, really has it down.
Yeah. And so that's the thing is like we don't want to, fall behind. The show doesn't want to be posting something that's 2 hours later than the outlets.
Right. Are you shooting RAW in that case still?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've found that, and I've tried both, but I've found that really, especially with like harsh lighting conditions, the RAW really just shines. There's some guys that are there that I'm friends with, and they're great photographers. They shoot JPEG, and they have a workflow that works for them. But for us, we've just decided that RAW is the way to go.
Cool. Well, I will take a quick break right there, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about your more recent video work.
Want a discount on your next order from Lens Rentals? Head to lensrentals.com/podcast or follow the link in the show notes for a coupon code. As the largest online photo and video equipment rental house in the world, Lens Rentals has been supplying both professionals and hobbyists for over 15 years. We carry everything from cameras and lenses to drones, computers, even VR headsets, all shipped straight to your door for whatever length of time you need. Rent the gear you need to get the shot and grab a discount at lensrentals.com/podcast. That's lensrentals.com/podcast.
Welcome back to the Lensrentals Podcast. I am talking with Nathan Armstrong and Will Evans of NLA Projects, and we covered Nathan's concert photography work, but more recently, Nathan and Will together have gotten into kind of commercial videography. So I want to cover that in the second half of this episode. And we'll have more questions for you in the second half, I promise. So is video production a relatively new thing for you? Not in terms of like skill or practice, just in terms of like doing it for a living more recently?
Yeah, I would say Nathan and I both kind of started our video, I would probably say hobby to start in middle school and high school. So we've kind of been around it for a few years. And then from like a production side of it or a company, you have like in the recent years, you look at the world and how much they need video. So you have a lot of companies that are wanting that to better their business. And so I would say in the past 12 to 18 months, we've seen a huge uptick in our business and our clients wanting more video work. So that side of the business has really been growing the fastest at NLA. And it's simply just because like you have a lot of companies that are wanting that they're wanting that for marketing purposes.
Right. Yeah. I think that's why, to get into like Lensrentals inside baseball stuff, I think that's why our video, the video side of our business has grown so much in the last like 2 years, is because it's not just Coca-Cola and like Ford and airlines making commercials. It's like your pizza places on the corner need video for social. It's like so many more people need video assets now than did even a few years ago.
Yeah. And so like for us, like we work from whether it's a small business to nonprofits to even just larger companies, like you see it all wanting more and more video productions. Because like even for us, whether it's working with a realty firm that's just wanting to up their social media, whether it's reels or just stuff like that, or even like we recently did Ford's Blue Oval City announcement with TVA. So like doing stuff like that.
That's been big news around here.
Exactly. So like they're wanting to push that more and more as it's getting closer to opening. And so whether you're a small business or a large business, everybody's wanting that video for marketing.
And your job title, correct me if I'm wrong, is production manager?
Correct.
What exactly, in your organization does that entail?
So basically what that entails is, so for me, I handle all of the logistics from getting, if we need extra help. So typically on a project, our clients that we kind of do work for every week, we have our team of 3 that covers most of our projects. But then when we get to bigger projects, we could have anywhere from 2 to 4, or we have a project coming up this year where it's going to require 15 to 20 people.
Wow.
So part of my job is figuring out who we need and how many people, and then obviously what kind of gear, whether it's gear that we have or that we're going to rent through you guys. So basically all the logistical side of once that project is booked, who do we need, what do we need, and how are we going to get it?
In the pre-production side.
Yes, right. in the pre-production side, yes.
And when it comes to production, I'd imagine in a smaller crew situation like that, everybody has to kind of wear a lot of hats. Do you do any shooting yourself or any?
Yeah, I think Nathan and I both would agree that we wear multiple hats. So from that standpoint, you would have, I would consider Nathan the producer, and then I would be your DP, and then depending on the client and the shoot, whether we have a second cam operator, whatever it may be, depending on the shoot. And then from an editing side, I'll kind of go through, do the rough edit, and then usually I end up sending it to we have a couple audio engineers that kind of mix it down and master that. And then depending on what it is, it could be sending it to our animator. And one thing that's really cool is that these aren't just like your people that you find on the side of the street. These are people that have mastered their craft.
Right.
And so that's what's really cool, that we've built those relationships with those people, and like they know our workflow. So they like know what we need, what we're looking for. And so that's what's really cool on the post-production side, is that we get to work with some of the best people, whether they're local in Memphis or in Australia or whatever. That's what's really cool. Like, we do wear multiple hats, to where Nathan and I both do the shooting, we do the editing, but also some of the stuff we do have to outsource, just because when we bring in a client, we want to know that we're going to deliver the best product. And sometimes that means outsourcing it to make sure that it sounds perfect, and that the animation, from the animation side of it, that like we're trusting these people to make sure that our clients are 100% satisfied with the final product.
Your graphics, especially. I looked at, I watched through some of your portfolio of commercial video work before we started this, and your graphics look good, and it makes such a difference. I worked at a commercial, videography production company before I worked at Lensrentals, and I think, not to blow this company up or anything, but I don't work there anymore. I won't name the company, but we did all of our motion graphics in-house, and me included. Nobody was like, I could do it. I could like pick up After Effects and figure it out, but nobody was an expert on motion graphics. And it is so important for commercial work to like have that stuff really nailed down and like know all your color space rules because of branding and all of it. Anyway, your motion graphic stuff looks great.
Yeah. And I think, again, just to reiterate, like the relationship side of it, that's what's really cool. Because yes, Nathan and I, we wear multiple hats, but at some point you exhaust that. And so that also could affect your final project.
Right.
So
you have to know when it's time to get somebody else in there.
Yeah. And so that's just what I think, that is a big difference when you work with us versus someone else, just because they may not have those relationships. Because I think that's one thing that I've noticed getting in or coming on with NLA, is that relationships mean a lot. Like Nathan talked about it from the concert photography, about with the publicist, having that relationship. It's the same thing. The relationship we have with people that we outsource to, that means everything to us, and then also just to the client as well.
And speaking of, I'd imagine, in the same vein as concert photography, the most difficult part of starting a commercial videography company would be kind of getting over that first hurdle where, okay, we've proven we've done this and people will now trust us to do this again, in the same way as like getting to know a publicist. You have to like have one client who kind of goes out on a limb and trusts you, and then you've got the portfolio to prove to other clients that, you're not some weirdo who can't do the job. What is your process like for approaching new clients, especially early?
I would say that Laura and I have relationships, and I think that, and I tell a lot of people this too, that are starting businesses. I think that what I've learned just by doing this for the little amount of time that we've been doing it, and I'm sure that we'll learn it more and more, but I've told Will this too. I think that you naturally grow your network as you get older. And so a lot of people that are starting businesses at, 20 or 21 that may, get 6 months in and get discouraged that we're not making $500,000 in the first 3 weeks. It takes some time for you to just naturally grow your network. And as you get older, and as you do more projects, your network of relationships just naturally grows. And that takes some intentionality, but I think we have found that just word of mouth and relationships and treating clients well and being easy to work with. I was having a conversation with one of our contractors the other day just about how we were discussing a client that we both work for, and how there's so many folks in our field that I think are just difficult to work with. And they make it difficult to work with. And it's like, oh, if you don't fly me here and let me stay at this hotel, and I need, 12 hours on site just to like get my bearings before we, there's just a lot of things like that. And I think that just being easy to work with, and we've had clients tell us that too, just being easy to work with goes such a long way. In, people being able to recommend you to people that they know. And I think also the fact that we're smaller allows us to be nimble. And the combination of that small internal team that's nimble with the kind of network of contractors that Will mentioned that we have great relationships with is a winning combo for us because we're really able to kind of change on dime. I'll share an example of this that we had the other day. We had a client that we shoot with every week, and they called and said, hey, one of our guys, our audio engineer, got stuck in LA coming back from tour, and he won't be here tomorrow, and he's got the gear that we're going to use to record this music set. They emailed and just said, hey, do you have anybody that can come engineer it? And also, would you be able to get all the gear that we need? And here's the list of gear. And
that's a big hurdle.
Right. And you guys have a ton of stuff, but it was everything from audio consoles to,
a lot of that tough. That's like specialty niche stuff.
And so we rented what we could from you guys. And then we had relationships with people here in town that we were able to call at 4:30 and we had the stuff in hand by 5.
Nice.
And so
that's very lucky.
I think having those relationships and being able to call in favors like that, and then being able to do that for other people also is such a huge thing. And you don't get that by being hard to work with. Right. You don't have that kind of flexibility. So that's a kind of backwards way to go into that question. But I think all of those things have allowed us to gain new clients and retain and keep the ones that we have happy. And the other thing is, and Laura does such a great job of this. I mean, she does most of our client communication, my wife, Laura, but she is incredibly good at being intentional about keeping genuine relationships with our clients as well. It's not just a work transactional relationship. It's a, hey, I genuinely care about what's going on in your life. Let's go to dinner and let's actually be real life friends and not, we show up, we shoot something, we pretend that we're friends for 30 minutes and then you hand us a check.
And that kind of basic stuff is so helpful.
Sure. And so I think, again, being nimble, we're able to do that. And that's one thing that I think sets us apart from others is that we're able to have those relationships.
When you are shooting a project, you mentioned that your your crew size varies. About what size crew is typical?
So the size of the crew heavily depends on what the project needs and their budget and what all it consists of. But like I was saying, our core team is 3 people, and we can get a lot done with that. But as the project grows or they're asking for more or a quicker turnaround, that can quickly grow to 4 to 5. So there's a lot of projects that we do that we really need extra people, whether it's we need an extra cam operator or whatever it may be. There's even some projects, as the projects get bigger and obviously depend on the client, we have a project coming up that we're going to need 15 to 20 people. And a lot of those 15 to 20 people we are relying on our relationships that we've already established with people to fill those positions.
Those extra people for that project, is that like a grip and electric situation, or do you need more camera operators just for, that specific one?
Yeah, we're kind of in the early pre-production. We actually have a meeting about this afternoon with the client, but it'll be, I think it's 5 cam ops, and then each of them will have a remote focus pull, and then we'll have a director, and we'll have electric, we'll have some ACs, and then just general runners and assistants too.
So is that like a live event situation?
Yeah, we're capturing a live event to produce something for TV. So you in those situations, it's like you have one shot, so it has to be right. So it's kind of the same type thing as the award shows. Is you build in fallacies,
right?
Having a runner so that you can kind of anticipate as much of the errors as possible.
And that may be an atypical example. I'd imagine you're getting into some equipment that you don't normally use. What does your typical gear list look like? What are some of your kind of go-to cameras for your video work?
Yeah, so typically for video, we stick with our main kit, I would say, is 3 to 4 Blackmagic Pocket Pocket 6Ks, which we found that are just super easy to work with. They're super user friendly. And then with that, we use the Leica R lenses, which is kind of gives that vintage look. And also it's there. We also, like Nathan was saying, for photo, we have fallen in love with the primes. So right now we have 4 prime lenses that we use for video mainly. So that's kind of our core kit. And then we've recently kind of been dabbling with the Leica SL2Ss and then having a adapter to mount our lenses onto that, which has been really cool. And that's been one thing that's nice about that is that Leica now we can record ProRes RAW. And so we can drop those right into Final Cut, and it cuts down a lot of that like editing that we have to do.
Is that internally? The SL2?
No, it is not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's to the Ninja.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So you run that out over HDMI to a Ninja and record ProRes RAW?
Correct.
Very
Yep.
cool.
Yeah, and so that's what's been really cool about the gear. And then also, like, there's been bigger projects where we'll use, like, the red Komodos. And then depending, obviously, on the size of the project, whether we're mounting using an easy rig or whatever it may be, but our core is that 3 to 4 Blackmagics. And then everything's all depending on the client, what they need, how big. And then we really like our lenses just because, like, I remember when I first came on to NLA, there was a huge difference in our video work that we put out. And it's the glass that we use, because if you watch a wedding video that we put out, it just has a different look than most people here in Memphis, because the R lenses just give off that vintage look that you don't really get with any other lens.
Yeah.
And so we've really fallen in love with that because we love the look of it and it's different. And then the color to it, it's just, I can't really compare it to anything else that I've seen. So that's been really cool.
Another thing that we like about the R's is that they're so versatile.
Yes.
They're pretty fast. So
they're very fast. And you almost have 2-in-1 at some point, because, if you stop them down to like 2.8 or 4, you almost get rid of all of that vintage aberration and characteristics. And so they can be very clean from a commercial standpoint. If you don't want the vintage look, they almost look like a modern cine lens at that point. And so they're also very small and light, which makes them easy to float on stabilizers.
Yeah, I noticed like all the camera examples you gave are pretty, you could easily handhold any one of them.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, and again, from a color standpoint, like obviously we're continuing to try to make it better. I told you earlier that I have a particular friend that does a lot of the knows a lot about color science, and we talk a lot of nerd stuff about that. But we're always like going back and forth, like looking at frames, and we're always trying to get it closer to that Alexa look. And so we actually just changed like one of our conversion LUTs from Log Direct 709 that I think does a little bit better of a job of looking like the Alexa highlight roll-off. And so we're always trying to make it better. But yeah, I think like from a photo standpoint, the A cam is almost always that SL2. From a video standpoint, obviously just the nature of the industry, the camera changes a little bit more depending on the project. But I would say for 90% of the, like Will said, for 90% of the work that we do, the Pocket 6Ks are more than great from an image quality standpoint. And then when we need a little bit of extra bump from like a dynamic range standpoint, we can jump up to the Komodo. So, and I also will mention this, a little Lensrentals plug, is that you guys rent the Lights primes.
Oh, yeah. Those are relatively new.
And that is a huge, we're going to be using a couple of those on this bigger project that we talked about. And those do actually a fairly good job. The ones that you guys rent, I forget what the line of them is, but they replicate a vintage look.
Oh,
and
nice. So, yeah, I've not even had a chance to shoot with them yet.
They'll match the R's closer than like a modern cine.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
Whether it was a struggle to match color and contrast-wise the Blackmagic to the Leica stuff.
Yeah. So, and like you mentioned, like Will mentioned, the SL2S, I mean, that's been great too from a like event coverage standpoint because we can drop, we edit in Final Cut, and so we can drop those ProRes RAW files straight in and do a quick turnaround on those. And again, it's a small kit. So I guess you could say that we're loyal to the Leica stuff across the board.
That's really surprising to me. I haven't, especially in the world of small to medium crew commercial videography, it's very rare for Leica to be kind of the go-to. With those lights lenses, usually they're used on, like cinema.
Yeah.
I'm really, really curious to I might do that this weekend. I'm going to, as soon as we get out of here, I'm going to place an order. I want to shoot on some of those.
I'll call you and we can find something to go shoot together this
weekend.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like you mentioned, I mean, they are very expensive, and for a medium to, a medium-sized budget project, they're very expensive. And I think that's why the Rs have become so popular from a cinema standpoint, is that they get you very close to, they bring the Leica look into your videography without the cost of the lights primes.
Yeah.
So,
and that indefinable look is exactly like you mentioned in concert photography, very important. If you're having clients look at your portfolio online and they're saying, this looks good and it doesn't look like every other thing I've ever seen, and your work, we'll link to the portfolio, obviously, so people can take a look. But it's remarkably consistent. The color matches the needs of the project, but the look is consistent from job to job, which is so important for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beyond your big project coming up, I don't know if that must be taking up a large amount of your, thought space. Do you have any projects you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, we like Will said, I think, we're probably shooting. I all my friends tell me that we're crazy for how much we shoot, but I mean, we probably shoot.
There is a lot.
We probably shoot 3 or 4 times a week.
That is wild. Yeah.
And so again, some of these are like Will said, I mean, we're doing everything from realty firm that needs social stuff to, the TVA Ford stuff. And so obviously, we love all the work that we're doing, but I think from a standpoint of, I guess, blockbuster projects that you would talk about, we love all the work that we're doing with TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. Majority of that stuff is photo work. We've done some video work with them, like the Ford Blue Oval City thing. We shot for that. We didn't do the post-production on it, but we shot for it, and we love all the stuff. We've got a project here in a couple weeks, and we probably shoot for them 3 times a month. And video-wise, yeah, I mean, the gig that we talked about this fall is taking up a lot of headspace, and that'll be a fun one as well. So we always say it's funny because, a week ago we looked at the July calendar and like, oh, it's going to be a little bit of a lighter month. That'll be nice. And then now it's pretty well full. So it always fills up, but we're grateful for that. So
yeah, good problem to have.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
All right. We'll link to everything in the show notes so you can check that out. And you guys get to your meeting. Good luck planning that huge shoot. That sounds like a big pain.
Well, it'll be fun.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to the Lensrentals Podcast. All the gear we covered in this episode will be linked to in the accompanying blog post, so make sure to check that out in the show notes. We'll also link to NLA Projects' website and Instagram account so you can check out some of the work Nathan and Will have produced. As always, make sure to visit lensrentals.com/podcast for a discount on your next order from us, and if you're enjoying the show, you can support it by subscribing and giving us a review on Apple Podcasts. We're on Instagram and Twitter at Lensrentals, and thanks to Jacques Granger for our theme music. More of his work can be found at revengebodymemphis.bandcamp.com. On the next episode of the Lensrentals Podcast, it's the season finale. We're going on a little late summer break, so we're bringing in some folks for one last roundtable talk before we all retreat to the beach. The topic will remain a surprise, but rest assured that we're all already in vacation mode, so it will be freewheeling on the next episode of the Lensrentals Podcast.